Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today, the webinar on the MBA waitlist. Why does it exist, and can you really get off of it? My name is Scott Edinburgh, and I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach, which is a boutique MBA admissions consulting and tutoring company. I'm going to walk you through a few different slides today. I will probably spend 15 to 20 minutes to give you some information about waitlists and application timing, and I'll try to answer questions that you might have during the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will be collecting questions that I'll be answering. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to type it in the YouTube channel, and folks will be collecting the questions, and I'll be answering those questions and any others that you have at the end of today's presentation. I want to start out by briefly introducing myself. I've been helping applicants around the world get into programs since 2008. I did my undergraduate at MIT, where I studied economics and business. I then worked at Deloitte in management consulting, and I went to Wharton for my MBA. And so I've been helping folks get into business schools for a number of years, and that's essentially my brief background. Switching gears, I know today we are spending most of the time to talk about waitlist strategies, and that's why you are all here today and what you're looking forward to me talking about. I wanted to show this timeline to illustrate that while our number one priority is to help you get off of the waitlist, sometimes applicants get off of waitlists and sometimes they don't. And I always recommend to keep a contingency plan in place. Given that round one is coming around the corner, in case you might want to reapply to schools if you haven't received any acceptances yet, this is a brief timeline to show you some things that you might want to consider doing. And some of these items could even help you during the waitlist strategy as well. And this is something that I can answer further questions about as we go along. Now, if you are on the waitlist for a school, there are still things that you can change about your profile, even at this point. Now, the black boxes here indicate things that are really hard to change. Undergraduate GPA, very hard to change. It's hard to make a lot of changes to the resume at this point. The essays have already been submitted. The interview, if you have an interview, has already been conducted. And while you can change some things about your work experience, most of it you can't change. However, there are a few things that you can still change that might help your case at this point. One is GMAT. I'm going to be talking about GMAT a little bit more later on in the presentation, but that's something that you can certainly change. I also highlighted in blue extracurriculars. The reason this is there is I have seen instances where some applicants do some great extracurricular leadership things that help to improve their profile. And the last is letters of recommendation. Now, you can't really submit a new letter of recommendation, but sometimes you can have an additional brief email submitted on your behalf. And I will talk a little bit more about when those situations occur and whether or not they might be relevant to you. Now, while individual schools' protocols vary in terms of what they want and what they don't want, there are really only a few things that are worth updating admissions with. I get questions every year from applicants, either current clients or those who sign up for waitlist support, about what can I do? I want to do everything possible to show admissions that I definitely want to go to the school. Now, here are a few things that you can do. A higher GMAT is absolutely grounds for providing an update. And depending on your situation, a GMAT may or may not help your waitlist chances. What I mean by that is if you think about the median score for the school that you're looking to apply to, as well as your specific background that you come from, if you are far away from the median, or even at the median, if you can improve your score by a significant number, I usually say 20 to 30 points, depending on the situation, that might help you get off the wait list. Now, the median score for each school varies, and whether you need to get above the median or not also depends on your profile in terms of your work experience, the number of years of experience, the particular background you come from, even the part of the world that you might come from. The next item is a promotion. If you are lucky enough to get a promotion at work, and of course this is easier said than done, promotions should be brought to the attention of admissions committees right away, even if this is a promotion that was planned. So if you're an analyst and you get promoted to a consultant, or an associate and you're promoted to a senior associate, if you get a promotion at any point during the waiting period, during the waitlist process, worth notifying admissions of. The last item I call here leadership role. Now, this is definitely a case-by-case situation. When I say leadership role, I mean either doing something at work that demonstrates your leadership abilities, or doing something outside of work in an extracurricular capacity that demonstrates your ability to perform as a leader. I will say that most minor leadership role changes are not really worth mentioning. I say that because you can actually hurt yourself if you provide an update to admissions with something that's really not that additive to your profile. To give you an example, if you are on the National Heart Association in your particular region, and you're on the Junior Board of Advisors, and your main role is to get involved in fundraising and other outreach activities. If you take on another role that includes not only fundraising, but recruiting other members to the board, that is probably not worth updating admissions with. It's certainly good and it's additive to your profile, but it's really not different enough that it is worth contacting admissions and providing them with an update. However, something that might be worth providing an update is, for instance, if you started an organization or you were an initial founding member of an organization and you take on a really new and substantial leadership role, perhaps it's expanding into a new territory, changing the model in a certain way, something that someone who is evaluating you would read and say, wow, this applicant really has improved themselves. They really have made a marked difference. That is the type of leadership role change that might be worth notifying admissions of. Now, taking a step back, how do waitlists really work? And why should you be cautious of providing some updates, as I alluded to earlier? A lot of this information is content that you might already know, but I think this will help you think through the process and decide what you should be doing in your situation. First, waitlists are used for a specific reason. Okay, many applicants apply, and a lot of these applicants are qualified. So once you are on a wait list, it means that you're just as qualified as someone who got in. I know that's something that's hard to hear and understand because you're not in, and you would much rather have the acceptance than have the waitlist letter. But from an academic standpoint and a work experience standpoint, it likely means that you were just as good, if not almost just as good as someone who got in. So then why did you not get in? Often we just have too many applicants with similar backgrounds. If you think about how business schools make up their classes, they create diverse, interesting, and engaging classes, which means they can't take 300 engineers in a consulting company, or they can't take 300 folks from a particular region of the world, or they're doing a particular job. So it might just mean that there aren't as many seats as there might need be to take you. Also, as acceptances are sent in, schools have a clearer picture of their class for the upcoming year. And once they see who has accepted an offer and who hasn't, that's when they may look to round out the waitlist. What that means is the waitlist process takes time. Now, it depends on the school. A lot of the schools have certain cutoffs where they will have a specific date that they will decide whether to keep you on the waitlist or whether to notify you that unfortunately there isn't a spot for you this year. But that varies based on the school. And it will take them time to realize, one, how the class is looking based on the round 2 applicants, and also how the round 1 applicants are either accepting or not accepting their offers of admissions. Now, you really don't want to give admissions more information that they aren't interested in hearing. And the reason for this is a lot goes into these applications, and you have likely already provided them as much as needed for them to evaluate you. So you want to really pay very close attention to the instructions the schools provide. Certain schools really do not want you to provide them anything. And in that case, you really want to be sensitive and listen to that advice. Some schools are a little bit more open to providing some information, but again, the information has to really be relevant. And based on what I mentioned earlier, has to be additive to the profile. That said, one thing that I'll mention is additional influential letters in some circumstances can help. Now, you should be very cautious in having anything additional written on your behalf because you already have submitted letters of recommendations. And most, if not all, schools' policies are to not take additional letters of recommendation. That said, when is it really worth having additional support content submitted on your behalf? Now, I call this support content because you cannot really submit a third letter of recommendation for schools that require 2 or a second for a school that requires 1 in most cases. However, if you know an influential alumnus of the school you're trying to get into who is very well connected, it may be worth asking for an additional brief email of support. Again, this is done on a case-by-case basis. I can't emphasize this enough. And it really should only be done if it's additive to your application. So if you already had an alum of the school submit a letter of recommendation and say how well you'll fit into that particular program's culture, then having an additional letter might not really help you. Again, this is not and should not be a full letter of recommendation. The admissions committee has already read the letters of recommendation, and they've used those to evaluate you. But sometimes if someone who is very familiar with the school and is influential in their community or is otherwise connected to the school, it might help to have someone submit a short email of support. Another case, which is not typical, is if you know a very senior leader who might help you in this process. Now, by very senior leader, I mean something like a CEO of a major organization or someone who is otherwise very successful in their own world who might be able to submit an additional email on your behalf. If you're unsure if you fall into this situation, you likely don't, just to be frank. But please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. And I often have folks that have questions on whether their managing director at their company is really the type of person that is worth having something else written by. The last item is a very rare case, and I hope it's not relevant for you, but if you have some problems with your initial letters of recommendation, if you have reason to believe that your letters of recommendation for some reason were not strong, something happened, the recommender didn't know what they were doing in writing the letter, haven't had as much experience in drafting letters or something else, then it might be worth considering an additional letter of support. Again, this is a case-by-case basis, and some schools really won't allow a full letter anyway. So usually this isn't needed, but in some cases I have seen this help applicants. I wanted to show you a little bit about experience. In round 1, I've placed applicants into all these top schools, as well as help them get over 1.5 million in fellowships. Now, some folks get in after the waitlist process, and every year I help applicants get off waitlists. But I would say that the majority of applicants get in without getting on waitlists to begin with. So waitlists are used by all schools, and every year applicants get off of the waitlist at all schools, but the numbers are not extremely high. The percentages of folks that get in off of the waitlist vary based on each school. I won't really go into details of that because some of the data is out there and some of it is not. But that said, it's out there, they are used. It's not a sure thing. So I'm going to take questions at this point from folks, and please feel free to type the questions into the YouTube or Facebook channels that you're watching this through. They'll be fielded and I will address them. But a little bit of information about how I can help through the process. I have waitlist only packages to answer any questions and help guide you in your situation, because the biggest question is, Scott, what should I do? Should I be doing anything to get off the waitlist? If so, based on my situation, what is that thing that I should be doing? But then for folks who may or may not get in this year, I wanted to show you how we help throughout the application process in case you end up applying next year. And these are the different ways that we can work with applicants throughout the process. So at this point, I would like to pause and take any questions that anyone may have. Okay, first question we have is, can informing a school about an admission offer from another school, especially if there's a scholarship of a similar rank, help or hurt you? That's a great question, and it's one that I fielded recently actually as well. If you have an offer of admission from another school that's of similar rank, and if they provide scholarship, that is something that will help you, and it is worth updating the admissions office of. Ideally, you combine that with another update if you have an additional update to provide them, but that is something that is usually worth notifying the school of. The next question is, I have asked additional letters of support from a CXO, and I gave her the recommendation questions. Is that a bad idea? Again, it really depends on your specific situation, but I would say that the additional letter should not directly answer all of the questions in as much detail as the first two letters did. For instance, some schools have you write 1,000 words or 2 pages for the letter of recommendation. You really don't want an additional letter of support to be as detailed. So if you provided the questions, I think it's great that that CXO has the questions, but you might want to tell them to not write as long of a letter as is required on the standard letter of recommendation. Next question, what do you make out of a wait list without an interview? Great question. Often schools will waitlist candidates before interviewing them for multiple reasons. The most common reason is that the school is still potentially interested in you, but is really interested in you if they get to the point where they have slots for someone like you. I usually see this happening when there's likely already a high number of folks who have been accepted who look and feel like you. And if slots open for someone like you, then they will want to talk to you. But they might only interview a certain number of applicants for the slots that they have, and they try not to take the time to interview you if they think there might not be a slot for you to begin with. That's usually what happens when you get on a wait list without getting an interview. Now, next question, what would be an average length of an update? I think this question means what is the written length of the document that you would be sending to admissions as your update. I would say that you should generally keep it brief. Now, brief can mean anything from 250 to 450 words. Those numbers are not very firm or very hard. I've seen updates that are shorter, I've seen updates that are longer. But the point is, you really don't want to write a whole long essay because they've already looked at your essays and they've already read them. The point of the updates are to provide factual information. And so this is where the facts that you provide them are a lot more important than how you write the facts and how long the document is. Whereas with a longer essay, you need to write a full comprehensive essay. How frequently should you send updates? This really depends on the school. And it's hard to go into a lot of detail here since there are a lot of schools out there, but I would try to err on the side of less frequent rather than more. For many schools, the answer is once. You might provide them one update. Maybe it's twice, depending on the situation. But this is where, as I mentioned earlier, you should pay attention to the directions the schools provide. If the schools really don't want to hear from you, and you contact them 2 or 3 times with updates, you're probably falling off the list pretty quickly. Whereas some schools that encourage you to provide an update, they're likely to be more receptive to multiple updates if the content is really there. And for instance, if you get a promotion in 2 weeks, and then you retake the GMAT in early March and you add 40 points, that's grounds for 2 separate updates. Next question is, if I suspect that interviews by alumni have resulted in my waitlist, what can I do? I think what this means is if you don't think the interview went that well, and you feel that you could have gotten in if you had a better interview, what can you do? Unfortunately, there really isn't much to do. The interview is a part of the process that sometimes helps applicants, sometimes hurts applicants, and sometimes is a net neutral. If you feel that for any reason the interview that you had with an alum really didn't go as well as you had planned, I think the best thing you can do is to reflect on the experience and think about why you think it didn't go as well and try to plan for any future interviews that you might do. But unfortunately, unless the admissions office invites you to talk to them again, which absolutely happens in some cases, you don't have the option of asking to talk to them again. So there's not really much that you can do. The next question is it okay to approach schools with waitlist update recommendations? So this has been addressed a little bit earlier in the talk, in that it is okay to provide an additional letter of recommendation in some circumstances if it's going to be really additive to your profile. But you should keep in mind that the directions are generally not to do this. And so if you just provide another letter that gives them the same content that they already have, that will likely hurt you. Does waitlist without an interview mean worse things than waitlist after an interview? So I addressed this question a little bit earlier as well. It doesn't necessarily mean worse things, but I don't think it's better. And I say that because if you got waitlisted without being interviewed, you haven't reached that point yet where they are interested in talking to you. And so you may or may not reach that point. So the next question is, how many applicants who are waitlisted without an interview get invites? That's a very hard question to answer, and it's not something that I will be able to address here because those numbers vary based on the school, and this is also information that isn't always disclosed. So really can't give you specific guidance on how many or even what percentage of applicants waitlisted without an interview get invites. And it's not something that would also necessarily help you, because depending on your situation, you might get an invite even if a very low percentage of folks get invited because there's something about you that they really like, or vice versa. Okay, next question is specific to one individual off of active duty in November and haven't came off of active duty in November and haven't worked since. Retaking the GMAT, going to start substitute teaching at a high school. Should I update this? And no, you don't have related prior work experience. I think this is an individual situation that I would need to look into further before giving advice. I am not sure whether it is worth providing this update, but I would really need to look at the full resume and background before giving you specific advice. From your experience, which schools are more likely to take you off their wait list? Is yield rate correlated with this? Okay, I will answer the second part of this question. Yield is correlated with this because if you think about it, as the yield changes, so if a school has a higher yield one year and a lower yield in the next year, they're probably going to be filling their wait lists. They're probably going to be filling the class with slots from the wait lists the more. However, it's not directly correlated because if you think about it, the schools generally know what their yield is, and they have a wait list that will allow them to fill a class. So take Harvard, for instance. Harvard has a very high yield, and every year they have a wait list, and every year they take applicants off of the wait list. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a higher yield means they don't use the wait list, but you can do some math to figure out what that might mean. So the next question was around general idea of historic stats of waitlist acceptance rates at top 10 schools. Again, this really varies, and I know that's a hard answer to hear. I would tell you that the acceptance rates, once you're on the waitlist, probably will not be markedly different than the overall MBA acceptance rate for that school. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because for some schools it will be less, and for some schools it will be more. Now, if you're interested in touching base with me for further discussion after this session, I'm going to present the screen again with my contact information, or please feel free to send me an email at scott@personalmbacoach.com, or you can visit my website at www.personalmbacoach.com. There's a question. International students applying in round one are waitlisted more often than not due to relatively fewer seats available for international students, especially applicants from India. I would say that, and I know this isn't going to necessarily help you, but students are waitlisted for a number of reasons, and often it is there aren't as many slots for someone like you. Now, I don't think that just being an international applicant means that you're more likely to get waitlisted, because the schools know how many slots they have overall in the class and how they want to fill up the class. Often I see applicants waitlisted who are international students, but then I see folks waitlisted who are students from the US as well. Okay, so thank you everyone once again for taking the time. I've enjoyed you. I've enjoyed talking with you, and I've appreciated answering all of these questions. And they're great questions. So I'm sure you'll have more things that you want to hear about. Please feel free to contact me with any additional information. And I look forward to the next webinar. Thank you very much.